Today I'm going to show you how to adjust the valves in your Honda 225. This model is an AK3. It's pretty similar. It's like the 2013 model to a lot of the, it's pretty similar to a lot of the newer ones. So hope this video helps. If you're curious how I got to this stage, look up my high and low fuel pressure video and it'll tell you how to take off these guys. But right now we're going to take this off real quick. Usually use the needle nose just to get that little guy off. And then again, just use this guy. High and low fuel pressure video will show you how to get it off. So a lot of this next parts don't have to be done in any particular order until we're starting to take this off, basically the entire intake manifold, because eventually we want to get over to our head covers. So I'm just going to go ahead and take off or disconnect the spark plugs. Then I'm going to take out all of these ignition coils. We got 3 on each side. Okay, just real quick, I wanted to show you how to organize kind of everything. These are all from my bracket covers here. These are from the actual ignition coils. This is from the rear bracket mount. A lot of times, if you can, you'll try to label it. I didn't label these ones. These are all incorrect if you look. Well, they should be anyway from different projects. But some people use Ziploc baggies, label them with masking tape. I just kind of try to lay out everything neat so all the bolts that are going to go together will stay together. There's all my ignition coils, rear bracket. So something to keep in mind to make putting it back together a lot easier if you're not used to this sort of thing. There are all sorts of little sensors we're going to have to disconnect. This one's a 2P for your water and the fuel sensor here. And so really all you got to do is just get this wire out of here by undoing this little plastic clip, and then we're gonna pull this out. So you're gonna have to pull up on this little tab, and I usually hate to say this, but you're gonna have to pull on these wires here. You never want to pull on wires, but that's really the only way I've found to do this here. So just pull up on this tab here, pull that 2P connector out. So we're going to take out this silencer case here. Just going to undo these cables. Just pull them out there. These are your throttle cables. I'm going to undo that one. There are going to be 4 little bolts we'll take out here. In the back there's this little crankcase breather tube that disconnects right here. You can see that little hole, and then you've got your little guy that goes to your throttle body. It's like a little loose rubber gasket. It's pretty easy, it's just spring fitted, and then you got it off. Only thing to be careful, sometimes if you notice we've got these little washers, sometimes they'll come off, sometimes they'll stay in, so just be careful they don't drop into the engine there. A lot of sensors we're gonna have to take off, so we're gonna start with the idle air control. You just squeeze down on this tab and start pulling. Again, don't try to pull on the wires, try to pull on this plastic piece. And we're just going to keep removing a lot of these little sensors, map sensors and things like that. This is your crankcase breather here. You can get this out of the way if you really want to. Eventually it's going to have to come free back there. Actually, I'll wait for a later time to do that one. You can take these guys off. And for the most part, you don't have to worry about these guys because they'll be pretty easy to figure out where they go because their wires are kind of bent that way. These pliers, I'm just going to come in just like was on that stern bracket mounting. It's easy. You just squeeze and pull that up. I'm just squeezing with the pliers and pulling it up. Alright, might be a little shaky, I'm sorry, but one last little one that we should take out is just going to go into our intake manifold right here. This little tiny breather hose. You're going to have to take it out there. Also, to get this throttle body off later, the way I'm going to do it, I'm going to take this off at this junction right here. Just your crankcase breather tube here. So that way this whole thing will come right out and you'll see why later. Alright, now we're at the back of the engine again. I'm just going to take off this little guy from the vapor separator assembly here. Just that little hose. And then we're gonna focus on taking this off here. So take this intake manifold upper cover off. It doesn't say you have to take these bolts off in any specific order, definitely a way to tighten them, but just to be safe, I'm gonna kind of start outside and work my way in. Couple things to check, make sure this little spring goes back and forth. Make sure engine gets all the air that it needs in this vapor separator. Other thing to check up here is going to be your gasket. You just want to make sure you've got a nice gasket. It's not damaged or anything, because I'm not usually one for replacing things unless they need to be, and this one looks just fine. This is one 10mm already loosened just because I didn't want to show you, but basically these are all 12s. We've got 2 nuts, the rest are bolts. I'm going to start outside, work my way in, and probably save some of these middle 2 for last. Alright, so this is the fairly controversial part, but up top is my throttle body. I don't want to have to adjust any of my throttles or do anything here, so I'm just going to leave the throttle body intact with my intake manifold. These are the only 2 bolts holding it in right now. So once these are undone, there's basically these bolts sticking out actually that the nuts were holding in before are going to kind of rest on there. I'll put the bolts down. I'm going to lift this whole intake manifold up into the side, keeping in mind the throttle cables can get caught on stuff up top. So maybe push it up, then I'll move it over to the side and lay it down, probably this facing the ground, just because the other part is kind of going right into your intake. So it's completely detached. I was holding it. Everything should be done. All those sensors we disconnected should be all disconnected. Just make sure you give a check. Looks like we're good. I'm just moving everything. Alright, so I wanted to show you what it looks like. So I just got my intake manifold laying, and it looks like there might be a little strain on the cables, but if you look, there's actually so much play. If you're really worried, you can undo them from these snaps here, but there's really not any strain on these cables, and it's just laying down. That way my throttle body's all intact and I don't have to remove that and save myself a whole lot of time. Alright, so I couldn't get you the best angle on everything, but this is the side I wanted to show you, and I can't even get to this side over here because the other engine, but I wanted to show you this side because this is where you've got your low pressure fuel pump, and when you've got your low pressure fuel pump, it's a little bit different. The other side's just easy. It just don't have anything mounted to it. So what I wanted to show you is we got to take these spark plugs. A lot of times in cars you're going to have to label them, you know, which cylinder is which, but over here we don't need to, because it's all going to fall back right into place. You'll see in the end. It took a little longer than I thought it would. So instead of disconnecting this, I'm actually just going to undo this little guy here. That way the breather is always attached. I'll just kind of leave it down here to the side. We don't need that. And this is basically just going to get folded up. You'll see how it folds right back, so you don't need to really label it like you do in cars. Try not to bend the wiring too much. It can get pretty delicate. Then I'm going to undo these. Like before, I'm going to start outside, work my way towards the middle, and you don't have to be too careful about holding it in place in the end, because these little places where the ignition coils go down to the spark plugs have a little rubber gasket that holds it in place pretty well. So let's get them undone. So one thing I did forget, we got to disconnect these little breather tubes here. There's one here, there's another one on the other side. I usually use a screwdriver, that's what I was trying to show you earlier. You don't want to break this plastic, but it does, if you pry it a little at a time with the screwdriver, it does help from putting a lot of strain when you have to yank on this rubber, especially if you don't do this very often. Then there's another one over here on the other side. It's not vertical, it's more on this side of this guy. This is the part where you just gently, now these guys have some rubber that seals around where the ignition coils go in for the spark plug, so you're going to want to gently, I don't usually like to pull on wires, I try to grab on big mounts, so I'll just gently wiggle it back and forth. It should slide off pretty easily. And I'm sure this is another controversial part, that is inside of our head cover. I usually just let it kind of rest. Alright, so I'm just letting it kind of bend on that little oil return line there. And if you look over on the other one, you can see this is what I'm letting it bend. If you want, you can undo this clamp, and then on the bottom part, it's not too, actually you can see it better from this angle. This bottom part right here, it's not too hard, it just fits right in. So you could unclamp this, pull it off. Over here, it's gonna have to stay attached somehow because you've got your fuel pump on the outside. Alright, so we're looking at the top of the engine now. This is our crankshaft pulley right here. And you're actually gonna turn the whole engine with your crankshaft pulley. Obviously there's your crankshaft, so these are gonna have to be your camshafts here. And the way we're gonna know when our cylinders we're gonna use for our top dead center, if you look, there's a little hash mark right here. It should line up with the camshaft gear that's in each of these. So I'm going to turn it and then I'll show you where the marks line up. Alright, so I'm going to turn this until, while I'm looking through this window, it should be green, but also it should have a little green dot by these little lines. But they also have little hash marks, and I just saw 4 pass through, which means 1 is going to be the very last. As you noticed, I used a really long handle. You need a lot of leverage. But if you look here, you see the tick mark lines up with the camshaft gear, the pulley there. And if you really want to be meticulous, you can make sure they line up over here as well, which obviously they do. And that's how we know that our number 1 cylinder is at top dead center, and then I'll go over to the number 1 cylinder and show you how to adjust them. And something to make sure of, this for this job, we're going to need a 0.2, I hope you can read that, I'm not sure, but it's going to be a 0.20 millimeter. This is a 0.203 looks like. Notice that it's a 0.008 inches. Make sure you're using millimeters, not inches. Just make sure you're using the right one. Don't look at 0.0 or 0.2 and have it be inches, because you're going to mess your engine up. If you ever forget, these are going to be your intake. It should be pretty obvious because there's your intake manifold. This should be obviously your exhaust because this is your exhaust manifold over here on the outside. Just keep in mind it's always inboard and outboard. Your intakes are always going to be towards the middle. So that's where it gets confusing. Here they're on the left, over there they're going to be on the right. Just in case for some reason you really couldn't remember, they've got them all labeled for you. EX, IN, intake, exhaust. So always feel free to check. Now, I have a special tool that I use. However, most of you probably don't have this. So I'm going to do the old-fashioned way and show you how to do it with a wrench and a screwdriver. If you have Yamahas, I talked to a Yamaha owner, and they were telling me that they have shims, so they don't do this very often. I do it every year, but so it's intake. We should be at 0.2. So we're just looking at right between the little tappet valve here. It's right there on top, and this is really loose. If you can pretty much just do that really easy. You want a little bit of resistance. If this video is not comprehensive enough, look at how to do it on a car, on a Honda engine, and you should be able to figure it out from watching a bunch of them. That's what I had to do originally. And this one actually feels pretty good. There's a good amount of resistance. Only thing that you want to make sure that you're not feeling something like this that's really loose and thinking that, oh, that's pretty tight actually. You want to go flat. See how they're not even touching now. Sometimes people do this or that with the valves and they think, oh, well, that's enough resistance, that's perfect. Nope, if you do it flat. So that's why you do it so much. So that's why I'm doing it from all different angles, making sure. This one needs to be tightened a little bit though. So what I'm going to do to tighten it, I'm going to loosen this nut. Alright, so usually these are pretty tight, and whenever you're doing it, if you have an open end, box end is going to be better, but in my opinion the best is going to be a socket with 6 sides to grab it. So these actually get pretty tight usually, so I'm going to try to loosen this. There we go. Got it loose. So what I'm going to do is hold this nut in one spot. Doesn't really matter yet, but I need it tightened just a little bit. It was a little too loose, so I'll tighten it hold it there with a screwdriver, tighten it with the wrench. Come back and test, make sure I'm on 0.2, which I am. That's just about right. Maybe could do a little bit tighter. You just want a little bit of resistance, but this is, when you're able to move it around a lot like that, it's a little bit too much. Again, make sure I'm on 0.2 millimeters. And looks like I over torqued it just a little bit. You want it to slide pretty easily, but I'm having a lot of trouble. So I might have over tightened. And there we go, that's perfect. And we're gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna do, usually I like to do 2 at a time, so I'll do the intake and this intake at the same time. And then I'll come over here and do both exhausts. And if this one's tight and this one's loose, I'll tighten, loosen, adjust both of them until I get one perfect. Alright, so I got all 4 of my valves right where I want them. Alright, so all 4 of them right in the spec where I like, and I will go up top and switch it over so that we're going to go to the other side and do number 6 cylinder after, or sorry, 4 after this. So back up top, now I'm going to go to number 4 cylinder, which is going to be on the inboard or port side, I guess, if you don't have 2 engines. So I'm just looking in this little window to watch when that little hash mark marks with, or lines up with the little plastic. Looks like that right there. Obviously, if you got a big amount of torque, you can put it exactly where you want it. Okay, so now you can see I just did 1 turn. Its hash marks are lined up. If you go more vertical, you can see it. I was trying to get in the shade. And that's number 4, which is going to be right here on this side. And then I'm just gonna repeat until I go all the way around back to 1. And then I'll show you how to button everything up once you've got all your valves done. Okay, so number 6 has just been tightened. I'm going to tighten all of them to spec. Basically what I did, I just tightened them down pretty tight, but none of them were to spec before. So I did end up taking this off just to show everyone how you can take it off. This is off the starboard side. So basically all I'm going to do is just take a little bit of oil. You don't necessarily need to take it off to do this. You can just have it kink in this hose or whatever. But I'm just going to do it kind of like you're doing an oil change on the oil filter gasket. Just a really light layer. It doesn't have to be heavy at all. 1 drop will go a really long way. Because you obviously don't want oil leaking all over your engine. And all over these little O-rings where it goes around. So we'll just get this back in. Just going to put this guy, cleaned it up a little bit, but not much. Just going to put him back in his little hole there. Make sure that all those ridges get down. There we go. And the biggest thing you got to be careful with are these little O-rings that are going to surround your ignition coils. So I'm going to get them all lined up. Make sure nothing's behind each other. And we're just going to wiggle it back and forth. Since I oiled them, it shouldn't be too hard. And they should stay there pretty much. Just gonna go grab some screws and tighten them down. Usually goes 1, 2, 3, 4. Then I'll have to look at the book for the rest. Alright, so I'm gonna hand tighten these. Alright, so we're gonna go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Just make sure you've got your clutch so it's not on drill. Obviously, we do not want to have any problems trying to get these bolts out later, so we're going to start. Alright, and that's actually pretty good. You can tighten them down a little more if you want, but I got my clutch set to where I'm pretty confident. These are going to go back into place. Not necessarily have to at this moment, but then this guy is going to want to go back in. And if you guys happen to notice on the other side here, I already did put this stuff back in. I didn't really need to probably show you how to clip it, but just remember you've got this clip that goes in, you've got to clip that wire there, put the 2P connector in, and then clip this little hose back in its spot. So we're going to try and put the intake manifold, the whole thing, like I was saying before, all these gaskets, I don't think this metal piece, but all these gaskets inside, the one that goes right on the outside of here that's on the manifold, it's supposed to get replaced, but I don't, because I usually inspect them and they look fine, even after 4 or 5 times of doing this for 4,000 hours. So I'll go ahead and get it. Since we're here, might as well reconnect the crankcase breather tubes before we put on the intake manifold. Get it all the way nice and tight. And then just doing the same thing on the other side here. I think you can see that right on top. Alright, get all these out of the way. Sometimes they bounce back in the way, but looks like everything should be ready for putting on the intake manifold. And there's something up top that's not quite letting it settle. So I'm going to go. There we go. Now it's on, so I can go up, see, make sure if there are some little hoses or wires in the way back here that I didn't see. And alright, so this one's a little all over the place, but I got them all hand tightened. Obviously you don't start with your power tool, you always start by hand, so you don't strip anything. Alright, so time to put the top cover back on, and we're just going to, all works, remember, and tighten them by hand again, and then we'll cinch it down. Got them all started by hand, as you can see. Then we'll just go ahead and get them, same thing, usually in 2 or 3 stages. One more thing, forgot to mention, just reconnect this hose to the vapor assembly. It's a vapor separator assembly here. Put that in there. Alright, so we're just taking everything and getting it back together. So this is our crankcase breather that's coming out of the, put it right there over the intake. Then we're going to, I told you these are pretty easy, it's hard to screw up. Connect these 2 guys. Intake air control. I'm going to connect these guys again. Should be pretty obvious which one's going to be which. Let's get this guy over here. And don't forget this little hose. It should be right around here. There we go. It's going to go right back into this little guy there. Time for our silencer case. So we're going to stick this opening right here, right onto that little opening. Make sure our crankcase breather tube goes into the right area as well. Okay, so we'll tighten these down.